You think you have enough money to pay the tuition? That cold remark fell like a knife, slicing through Marcus's pride, echoing in the formal guest room of Greenwood Heights Academy. A deadly silence filled the air, as if even the portraits of ancestors hanging on the walls were sneering in disdain. Elizabeth Harper, dressed in a luxurious cream-colored suit, stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, shoulders straight, chin slightly lifted, exuding the demeanor of a queen in a centuries-old castle. Her eyes, pale gray, cold, and sharp like daggers, looked at Marcus with unmasked contempt. Marcus clenched his hand around Sarah's. She huddled close to him, her wide, dark eyes glancing from Elizabeth to the lavish room around them, the suffocating atmosphere heavy in the air. "Greenwood Heights," Elizabeth continued, her voice sweet but prickling with sharpness, "is a place that preserves excellence through generations. We must be very careful when selecting suitable families." She emphasized the word suitable, like an invisible slap to Marcus. Several parents sitting nearby exchanged glances, and subtle smiles appeared on their faces. A blonde woman with an Hermes bag resting on her lap leaned in and whispered to the person next to her, "Does he think that a little money can get him in here?" Marcus heard every word, every murmur, but his face remained cold, not a muscle twitching. He bent down to straighten Sarah's collar, as if those insulting words were nothing more than a breeze. "Papa," Sarah whispered, her innocent voice tinged with sorrow. "Why don't they like me?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, his heart aching. He bent down and kissed her forehead. "They don't know how wonderful you are, sweetheart." Elizabeth stepped closer, the sound of her heels echoing through the silent room. She stopped right in front of Marcus, so close he could smell her Earl Grey tea and the icy aura of her power. "Mr. Allen," she said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "tuition here is not just a number on a page. It's a mark of class, a long-term commitment to this community. I'm afraid there are values that can't be bought with money, especially with freshly made wealth." A small laugh came from the corner of the room. An elderly father, impeccably dressed in a suit, gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, looked at Marcus like he was some kind of strange creature. A young mother whispered into her child's ear, "Never think money can let you stand on equal ground with those truly deserving." Elizabeth lifted her chin, a half-smile curling on her lips, reveling in her victory. She continued, driving the knife deeper into the open wound. "Sometimes, choosing a more suitable environment is better for both the parents and the child. I suggest you think carefully, Mr. Allen, and don't let your daughter suffer when she finds herself lost in a place that isn't meant for her." The room was suffocating. The ticking of the old clock on the wall seemed unusually loud. Marcus looked up, meeting Elizabeth's cold gaze. His eyes were sharp, but his voice remained calm and polite. "So, what's your official answer?" Elizabeth didn't blink, her lips curling into a smirk as if she were handing down a final judgment. "Greenwood Heights declines to accept your daughter. This is the final decision." No reason, no apology, just an invisible iron gate slamming shut before the future of an innocent child. Sarah tightened her grip on her father's hand, her lips trembling. "I'm sorry, Papa." Marcus looked down at her, the pain in his heart rising up to his throat, but he swallowed it down. "No, my love, you've done nothing wrong." He stood taller, more imposing, in the midst of the judgmental and dismissive gazes in the room, but he said nothing more. His silence was the slap back at their pettiness. He took his daughter's hand, turned, and walked out of the room, the place that once prided itself on being a symbol of knowledge, but in truth was rotten with arrogance and narrow-mindedness. Behind him, Elizabeth turned back to the guest table, closing Sarah's file with a decisive rustling sound, like closing a book that would never be opened again. A small, soft laugh, sharp as a needle, echoed from the corner of the room. Marcus stepped down the marble stairs, the cold wind fluttering his suit. He glanced back at the Greenwood Heights Academy sign, his eyes flashing with determination. Marcus held Sarah's hand, walking briskly across the cobblestone courtyard where the neatly trimmed hydrangea bushes stood, almost cold in their perfection. The wind blew through the old oak trees, their leaves rustling like whispers of secrets only time could understand. Father and daughter walked in silence, but each step of their shoes echoed like hammer blows, deepening the humiliation they had just endured. Sarah looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes already reddened. "I don't understand. Dad, why do they hate us just because I wanted to study here?" Marcus stopped in the middle of the courtyard, sitting down at eye level with his daughter. He gently stroked her cheek, wiping away the tear that had just fallen. My love, some people, they hate what they can't understand or control. But remember this, no one can deny your true worth, except you, from a distance. A group of parents and students walked by. A middle-aged man, wearing a black cloak, paused and glanced at Marcus, shaking his head with a sneer. Still dreaming, huh? They'll never learn. Marcus heard it clearly, but he simply stood up, adjusted his suit collar, and took his daughter's hand, continuing to walk away. Each step he took was firm, like hammering at the door Elizabeth Harper had just tried to slam shut. They left the school grounds. The old wrought iron gates creaked closed behind them with a long, drawn-out sound, like a statement. This place is not for you. Elizabeth Harper stood on the second-floor balcony, holding a cup of tea, but her fingers were pale from gripping it too tightly. She watched Marcus and his daughter walk away, her gray eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Yet, deep within, a flicker of unease flashed because Marcus's calmness was too terrifying. In the black car parked outside the gates, Marcus opened the door for Sarah to sit, then moved around to the driver's side. He didn't speak. It was only when the car began to roll away that he spoke, his voice low and steady. Remember today, Sarah, you'll see. Those who think they can slam the door in your face will have to open it and invite you in. Sarah looked at her father, her eyes shining with trust, though her heart still carried 1,000 questions. The car sped down the cobblestone road, leaving behind the centuries-old academy with its gray brick walls and proud flags waving. The sky was a deep blue, but inside Marcus, a storm had already begun to form. On Elizabeth's desk, Sarah's file remained open, and she smirked. People like him will always stand outside these gates. The car rolled silently, carrying Marcus and Sarah away from Greenwood Heights Academy, a place that prided itself on being a symbol of excellence and tradition, yet had just exposed its rottenness with the venomous words of disdain. The wind outside rustled through the ancient oak trees, as if mocking or whispering, bearing witness to an unspeakable humiliation. Inside the car, Sarah rested her head against the window, her eyes dry but her small hand still tightly gripping her father's. The heavy atmosphere filled the space, the only sound being the soft hum of the engine, like a steady breath trying to keep Marcus calm. Marcus drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but in his mind, Elizabeth's words echoed relentlessly. Mr. Allen, do you think someone like you has enough money to pay for tuition here? Greenwood Heights declines to accept your daughter. Sometimes, choosing a more suitable environment is better for both the parents and the child. Those words weren't just aimed at him. They were aimed directly at his innocent little girl. And deeper still, they pierced through the bitter memories of his own past, memories of being rejected, ridiculed, and left standing outside the gates of places that told him he didn't belong. Sarah whispered softly, her voice trembling, her eyes still filled with unspoken questions. Dad, are we going home? Marcus gently squeezed her hand, his eyes still locked on the road ahead. Yes, sweetheart, we're going home, but this is not the end. The wind picked up again, blowing a few golden leaves from the trees onto the roadside. In the rearview mirror, the gates of Greenwood Heights faded away, but in Marcus's heart, they became clearer than ever. Those gates would no longer stand as a symbol of contempt. On the other side, Elizabeth stood in the highest office of the main building, arms crossed over her chest, staring out the window. The Earl Grey tea beside her had gone cold. She watched as Marcus's car disappeared from view, a sense of satisfaction filling her heart. New money, she muttered under her breath, her tone dripping with contempt. They think a little wealth can buy their way in here on the desk. Sarah's file remained open. Elizabeth flipped through it, stopping at the photo of the young girl in a light blue dress, her innocent smile shining against the white background of the file. Elizabeth smirked, then carefully closed the file and tucked it away at the bottom of the drawer, as though trying to erase the existence of Marcus and his daughter. But what she tried to hide the most would be the very thing that would destroy her. That night, in the modest but cozy home he had built for his family, Marcus sat by the window, looking out at the pitch-black night sky. Sarah had fallen asleep, her breath steady, her face still marked with a hint of sadness. Marcus held the business card that Elizabeth had once handed him, a subtle invitation to the school's fundraising gala. A gala that she undoubtedly assumed he would never dare or be worthy enough to attend. His fingers traced the edge of the business card, his gaze growing colder, mirroring the dark sky outside. You've just chosen the wrong person to humiliate. Marcus placed the business card down on the table, stood up, and dialed a number. His voice was low. Firm prepare. I'm going to that gala. The Greenwood Heights fundraising gala took place in the grand hall of the main building, a lavish space with high ceilings, sparkling crystal chandeliers, and long dark red velvet curtains that reached the floor. The sweet sounds of the symphony orchestra filled the air, but amid the classical melodies, the whispers, the glances, and the half-smiles overshadowed everything else. Marcus walked in with Sarah, his hand gripping his daughter's as a silent gesture of protection. Sarah wore a simple white dress, the one her mother had picked for special occasions, but amid the sea of people in haute couture gowns and tailored suits from famous designers, father and daughter became the center of attention not for standing out, but for standing apart. Eyes shot toward them like daggers examining, sneering, feigning surprise. A blonde woman, her hair curled into waves and a 3-strand pearl necklace around her neck, covered her mouth, whispering to her companion, but loud enough for Marcus to hear clearly, "Oh, I'm surprised he actually showed up. Overconfident or just plain stupid?" A quiet laugh erupted from a nearby group, echoing through the space that, despite its opulence, now felt thick with pretense. Marcus kept walking, his eyes fixed ahead, his expression calm to the point of being cold. He heard it all. He understood it all. But he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him angry or flustered. Sarah looked up at her father, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes red-rimmed. "Dad, can we go home?" Marcus bent down, his gaze softening as he looked at his daughter. "Sweetheart, we're here because they think we won't dare show up, and we're not going to give them a reason to believe that's true." They paused at the bar, where a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses looked at Marcus, smirking. "I thought this was a party for parents, not outsiders." A glass of wine swirled in his hand. He raised the glass as though to toast to his own mockery, then turned and walked away with a chuckle. At the center of the hall, Elizabeth Harper stepped up to the podium. The lights shone down on her, highlighting her dark blue evening gown that sparkled, her silver hair perfectly styled. She spread her arms wide, her voice booming as if giving a blessing. "Welcome, everyone, to the annual Greenwood Heights Gala, where we come together to preserve our values and build a community worthy of this school's century-old legacy." Her gaze swept across the room, pausing momentarily on Marcus, then sliding away as if he were invisible. This is where families, bound by generations of tradition, come together to share a vision, an ideal, and a sense of class. As the applause rang out, Elizabeth stepped down from the podium and leisurely walked toward Marcus and Sarah. She stopped before them, her eyes gleaming with a refined kind of falseness. "Mr. Allen, how unexpected to see you here. I admire your courage to come to a place where—" She deliberately paused, emphasizing each word. "You know you don't belong around them." Laughter erupted, mixed with the clinking of glasses like mocking chimes. Marcus met Elizabeth's gaze, his own eyes unnervingly calm. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. I always teach my daughter never to back down from any gate, no matter how many people think it's not meant for her to pass through." Sarah squeezed her father's hand, her face no longer filled with fear, but a mixture of pride and innocent confusion. Elizabeth smiled faintly, then turned away, but not before delivering one last cutting remark. "Oh, and don't forget, tonight's gala is for donations. Not everyone has the means to contribute." Marcus remained still, his eyes following Elizabeth's retreating figure among the sea of people. Each smile, each glance filled with sharp thorns. He bent down to whisper to Sarah, "Look closely. Sweetheart, the ones laughing today, they'll be the ones apologizing to you later." The music played on, the orchestra shifting to a more somber piece, but it couldn't drown out the whispers and snide remarks around them. "He thinks showing up here means he's accepted. Ridiculous. A dreamer. Thinking money can buy anything." A server approached, handing Marcus a black envelope. Speaking softly, "This is what you requested." Marcus took the black envelope, his hand gripping it so tightly that the edges of the paper crinkled slightly. The whispers, the mocking smiles around him seemed to fade, replaced by the thudding of his heart not from uncontrolled anger, but from a deep urge that had ripened. The right moment to strike back was approaching. He placed the envelope in his vest pocket, his eyes scanning the banquet hall. Those faces were still smiling, still toasting each other, still treating him like an unwanted outsider, but it was their smugness that kept him unusually calm. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide. "Dad, what did you get?" Marcus gently bent down, his voice softening with his daughter but still filled with the fire of determination. "Stay close to me. Everything will be okay." Elizabeth returned to the crowd, walking proudly as if she had granted a lowly creature the privilege of standing in the same room. A man standing next to her, his voice full of disdain but still pretending to lower it, said surprised he hasn't left yet. Some people just cling on so stubbornly. Elizabeth took a sip of her wine, half smiling. "Let's see if he dares to stay until the end." She turned her head to look at Marcus, her gaze reminding him that every step he took here did not belong. Marcus moved slowly towards the center of the hall, where the band had temporarily stopped. The chandelier lights shone on his face, highlighting the calmness that bordered on coldness. A party staff member approached, intending to stop him, but Marcus raised his hand lightly, his decisive look causing the person to halt, then retreat. He opened the envelope and pulled out a thin stack of papers. His voice rang out, without the need for a microphone, but loud enough for everyone in the banquet hall to hear clearly. "Excuse me, may I have a few words before we continue this event?" The room, once noisy, suddenly fell silent. All eyes turned to Marcus. The murmurs ceased, wine glasses frozen in midair. Elizabeth furrowed her brows, but still tried to maintain her composure, stepping forward with a soft but sharp tone. "Mr. Allen, this is a private event for the Greenwood Heights community." "I'm afraid," Marcus interrupted, his voice deep and firm. "Precisely because this is the Greenwood Heights community, I must say this." Elizabeth Harper stepped closer, her red lips curling into a half smile. "Mr. Allen, I'm truly surprised to see you still here. I fear that tonight's gala is for those who truly belong to the Greenwood Heights community." A light laugh echoed from the corner of the room. A young parent whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Does he think just showing up here means he's accepted?" Marcus looked at Elizabeth, his gaze calm but as deep as an abyss. He was no longer patient. His voice rang out, clear and decisive. "Mrs. Harper, I believe it's you who are mistaken about this community, and it's time for me to make it clear who I am." The air seemed to freeze. A few laughs died out. Wine glasses paused in midair. He raised the stack of papers. "These are copies of the actual donations to the school fund over the past 3 years. Among them are names of people sitting here today, people who didn't contribute as they've been bragging about." The murmurs started again, but this time not aimed at Marcus, but among the very people who saw themselves as the elite. A few worried glances flashed, faces turning red, not from the wine. Marcus declared even more loudly, "I am Marcus Allen, CEO and founder of Allen Future Academy, the leading online education system, serving over 30 million students worldwide. I am also the chairman of the Allen Future Foundation, the organization currently negotiating to acquire the land that Greenwood Heights is renting, and is about to sign a contract to invest in building a new modern school here." The banquet hall was completely silent. Elizabeth's eyes widened, her lips parting as if she wanted to respond, but no words came out. An elderly man leaning on a cane in the corner mumbled, "Astonished. That's Marcus Allen. Oh my God." Marcus looked around the crowd, his voice warm but full of power. "And I'm here tonight not to seek acceptance from anyone. I'm here to remind you a person's worth is not defined by skin color or background. It lies in what we contribute to this society." Sarah looked at her father, her eyes shining with pride unlike any she had ever felt before. Elizabeth took a step back, her hand trembling slightly, the wine glass in her hand clinking softly. She tried to smile, but her smile was twisted. "How?" "Wonderful. Mr. Allen." "I had no idea," Marcus interrupted, his voice echoing through the banquet hall. "Exactly. Because you've never looked at me with respect. You never bothered to learn who I truly am." A lone round of applause erupted, then slowly spread, like waves wiping away the pretense that had once ruled here. "We were terribly wrong." A middle-aged parent, his face flushed, lowered his head to avoid Marcus's gaze, whispering to the person beside him. Marcus walked slowly, hand in hand with Sarah, passing through the sea of people frozen in place. Each step he took echoed in the hearts of those around him, reminding them of the very words they had just spoken, the disdainful looks and the mocking laughter. A young woman, who had laughed earlier, now trembled as she hastily set her wine glass down on the table. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with confusion, watching Marcus's figure disappear into the distance. Elizabeth stood alone in the middle of the banquet hall, her hands dangling at her sides, her gaze vacant. She turned to look at the faces of those who had once sided with her, but now, one by one, each person avoided her eyes, as if afraid to be pulled into the whirlpool of humiliation, unable to accept it. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Her voice rose, but it trembled. No longer holding the same air of power, Mr. Allen, I believe this is just a misunderstanding. Greenwood Heights has always valued every contribution, and please understand that we... Marcus stopped. He turned around, his deep gaze locking onto Elizabeth's. He didn't raise his voice, but every word hit like a hammer against the mask she had been wearing. It's not you, nor anyone here, who has the right to offer me or my daughter respect. Respect is something you should have shown from the start, not when you see power and wealth. The banquet hall held its breath. The background music came to an abrupt halt. All that was left was the sound of heavy breathing and the confused glances of those who had just exposed their own hypocrisy. A voice rose from the crowd, trembling. Mr. Allen, I'm sorry. I truly apologize. Another bowed his head. Mr. Allen, you're right. We were wrong. Marcus looked around, his gaze no longer cold, but quietly heavy with the understanding of human nature. I don't need your apologies. I only hope that your children don't learn the things you've shown them tonight. Sarah looked up at her father, her face glowing with pride and love. Elizabeth swallowed hard, her eyes seeking help from those around her, but all she received were looks of avoidance. Shoulders subtly shrugging in shame, Marcus gave a light bow, took his daughter's hand, and led her out of the banquet hall. The large doors opened, letting the night air rush in, sweeping away the suffocating atmosphere inside. Outside. As he stepped down the marble stairs, Marcus paused and looked up at the night sky. He silently thought, the storm is just beginning. This is only the first night you'll face the truth. Marcus stood still on the marble steps, watching the iron gates close behind him, but in his heart, it had opened a new chapter, a chapter of truth, of paying the price, and of a legacy that would no longer have room for pretense. Sarah tightened her grip on her father's hand, her face still flushed with emotion. Dad, are you sad? Marcus looked down at his daughter, his eyes softening. He gently stroked her soft hair. No, sweetheart, I'm proud. Proud of you for bravely facing everything the worst of people can show. And we still walk forward with our heads held high. Behind the closed door, the whispers in the banquet hall rose again like a wave breaking through a dam, but this time, it wasn't mocking Marcus, it was the humiliation, panic, and fear of those who had just tarnished their own honor. Marcus led Sarah to the black car parked by the side of the road. His assistant, who had been observing from afar, stepped forward and opened the car door. Sir, the school board, I just received word they want to meet with you. Marcus smiled faintly, his gaze drifting past the tall windows of the banquet hall, where the lights were still shining brightly. But inside, only chaos lingered in the hearts of everyone there. Tell them I'll meet with them, but not to hear apologies. I'm meeting them to discuss the real future of Greenwood Heights. Sarah looked up at her father, her eyes shining. Dad, Greenwood Heights will change. Right? Marcus nodded, his gaze distant but resolute. Yes, I promise you. Sweetheart, you'll study at a place where no one will ever have the right to look down on you just because of who you are. He looked into his daughter's eyes, gently squeezing her hand, then softly added, And you must promise me this one day. You'll teach the children there how to truly respect others. The night wind blew again, carrying the sound of the car engine starting, taking Marcus and Sarah away from the old, crumbling school. But behind them, in the banquet hall, Elizabeth Harper stood motionless, listening to the whispers, the criticisms that were echoing back at her, the collapse she never expected. From those who had once adored her like a queen, in the darkness, Elizabeth clenched her fists, her eyes darkening with a glimmer of malice. I will not let him destroy this place so easily. In her private office on the highest floor of the school, Elizabeth entered and slammed the door behind her, as if to sever herself from the entire world. She plopped down into the old leather chair that had for years been her throne of power. Her trembling hands removed each ring, placing them on the desk as if shedding a mask of nobility that had now become meaningless. Outside, the lights of the banquet hall gradually dimmed, leaving only the moonlight streaming through the window, casting a faint glow on Elizabeth's pale face. She muttered to herself, her voice choking in her throat. No, I can't let him take everything like this. Greenwood Heights is mine. It's my family's legacy. No one, not even him, has the right to destroy it. Her eyes sparked with determination, and as if finding a way out. She opened the desk drawer and pulled out an old stack of files. Documents regarding land ownership, shares, and secret agreements few knew about. Meanwhile, at a quiet hotel in the city center, Marcus sat by the window, gazing at the distant city lights. Sarah had already fallen asleep in the next room, but Marcus remained awake, his eyes lost in thought. His phone buzzed. The screen displayed the name of a longtime lawyer for the Allen Foundation. Marcus picked up the phone, his voice calm and firm. "Go ahead." On the other end of the line came a voice. "Hurried but eager, sir. I've just received a signal. A group of major shareholders from Greenwood Heights has contacted us. They wanted to discuss selling their shares." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as if swallowing the rising tide of emotions inside. "Good. Arrange the meeting. But I want it to be held in the very hall of Greenwood Heights. Let everything start and end there." As the night grew deeper, Greenwood Heights sank into silence. But the schemes, plots, and resolve of the two adversaries at either end of the battlefield burned brighter than ever. Elizabeth gripped the stack of files in her hands, her eyes burning with intent. "He may buy the shares, but I still have this. Let's see. Marcus Allen, who truly controls Greenwood Heights." In the office, Elizabeth sat at her desk, her eyes locked on the stack of files in her hands. Her eyes were dark and swollen from a sleepless night. A cold cup of coffee sat beside her, but she didn't bother to touch it. Each page she turned over was a desperate attempt to find a way out. Old contracts, binding clauses, legal rights she had silently manipulated to keep Greenwood Heights in her grasp. A knock on the door broke her concentration. Her personal assistant, a middle-aged man with a tense expression, entered, holding a tablet. "Ma'am, I think you need to see this." Elizabeth snatched the tablet from his hands, her eyes glued to the screen. A news clip appeared. Allen Future Foundation announces plans to establish a cutting-edge technology school on the current grounds of Greenwood Heights. Negotiations with shareholders officially begin. She froze. Her hands trembled, and her face went pale. She placed the tablet down on the desk, but immediately stood up, walking briskly to the window, staring out at the schoolyard where students were beginning to arrive for class. "No! He can't do this! I won't let an outsider destroy this place. Destroy the legacy of my family." Meanwhile, in the Greenwood Heights auditorium, Marcus entered, his face calm, the sleek black suit he wore adding to his authoritative presence. Accompanying him were his team of lawyers, advisors, and representatives from the Allen Future Foundation. The auditorium, once used for graduations and formal events, had now become the battlefield of power and honor. At the long table sat the shareholders, their faces heavy. Many had already decided to side with Marcus, while others hesitated, torn between their pride and personal interests. Marcus scanned the room and then spoke in a deep, resonant voice. "Thank you all for coming today. We're not just discussing shares. We're discussing the future of Greenwood Heights, whether it will continue as a symbol of a rotting past, or become a beacon of modern education, one that no longer discriminates, no longer deceives." A small round of applause rang out from an elderly shareholder. A few others nodded in agreement. The atmosphere in the room began to tilt in Marcus's favor. The door to the auditorium swung open. Elizabeth entered, her face tense, but her eyes flashing with the final spark of determination. She walked straight to the head of the table, slamming a stack of files down. "I'm still here, and I will not let you sell out Greenwood Heights for empty promises." Marcus looked at her, his gaze calm but firm. "No one is selling out Greenwood Heights. Mrs. Harper, the one who has exploited it to maintain power and arrogance, is the real traitor to this legacy." Elizabeth gripped the files tightly, her voice dripping with venom. "I still have my trump card.
Don't think you've won just yet.
The atmosphere in the auditorium was thick and suffocating. All eyes were on Elizabeth and Marcus, two opposing forces clashing in the very place that had once been the symbol of her absolute power. The shareholders seated at the long table were tense, some breathing heavily, others clasping their hands tightly, while a few exchanged furtive glances, waiting to see who would strike first. Elizabeth placed both hands on the stack of files in front of her, her voice initially shaky but gradually regaining its firmness. You must remember, Greenwood Heights is not just a school, it is the legacy of this entire community, and I hold the veto power over any transaction of shares exceeding the limits set by our charter. You will not be able to seize it as easily as you would a nameless company. A murmur rippled through the room. A few shareholders began whispering to each other, concern flickering on their faces. Marcus stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Elizabeth, neither angry nor worried, only the calm of someone who had already anticipated this move. He took a step forward, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase and placing it on the table. Mrs. Harper, I respect this legacy more than anyone else in this room has ever respected it. And I respect the rules of the game. In my hands. He lightly tapped the folder are the signatures of over 68% of the official shares. And more than that, proof that you have used your veto power to block the necessary reforms to maintain a system of discrimination and stagnation. The board will decide, and we will see who is truly selling out Greenwood Heights, an elderly shareholder with white hair who had long been a supporter of Elizabeth. Spoke up, Elizabeth. Is this true? Have you blocked the changes just to retain power? Elizabeth was about to respond, but her throat tightened, her mouth dry. She glanced at Marcus's stack of documents, the papers, signatures, and evidence that had exposed all of her manipulations hidden for so many years. The atmosphere shifted. Another shareholder stood up, decisively declaring, I support Mr. Allen's proposal. Greenwood Heights needs change, and it needs to be saved from the suffocating grip of the past. Marcus said nothing more. He stood in silence, watching Elizabeth, letting that silence become the final blow, exposing her utter isolation and desperation. Elizabeth took a step back, her eyes scanning the room, desperately searching for one last ally, but all turned their faces away. She gripped the files tightly, her voice thick with emotion. You'll regret this, Marcus Allen. Allen Oman. Don't think you've won. Was this truly the end for Elizabeth? Or did she still have one dangerous move left? Marcus slowly bowed his head, his voice calm yet powerful. There is no victory when the loser is evil itself. Greenwood Heights begins a new era today, one where value is measured by intellect and heart, not bloodlines or names. One of Marcus's lawyers handed the board the draft of the school reform plan. Elizabeth let go, allowing the stack of files to fall to the ground. The papers spilled open, scattering across the cold marble floor. Much like the pride of Elizabeth, shattered into pieces, she stared at the pages lying at her feet, her eyes flashing with a mix of rage and despair. Her hands, which had once firmly grasped power for years, now trembled, and there was nothing left to cling to. Marcus remained standing there, tall and composed, saying nothing more. It was the silence in the room, the awkward glances from the shareholders, and the humiliating silence itself that spoke for him, a young shareholder, who had previously stood silently on Elizabeth's side. Now lowered his head, Mr. Allen. Allen, we support your plan. It's time for Greenwood Heights to change. Another voice rang out, this time from the elderly shareholder with white hair, a man Elizabeth had once considered a close ally. Elizabeth, you've allowed your pride to blind you for far too long. It's time for us to choose the future of this school, not our personal honor. Elizabeth stepped back, her back against the wall of the auditorium. She felt the entire room spinning around her. The faces, those who had once bowed to her, who had raised their glasses in her honor, now turned their backs. Marcus scanned the room one last time, his voice resonating, calm but firm. Let Greenwood Heights be a place our children are proud to enter, not one they bow their heads to leave. I did not come here to destroy a legacy, but to save it from the very chains that have held it captive for far too long. Sarah stepped forward from behind, taking her father's hand and holding her head high. She looked around, no longer filled with fear, but with pride. A round of applause rang out, initially hesitant, but quickly spreading like wildfire. One by one, The shareholders and teachers present stood up, clapping in support. Elizabeth stood alone in the middle of that sound, her heart squeezing with suffocating pressure. She picked up the files from the floor, clutching them tightly to her chest, as if holding on to the last remnants of her power. Elizabeth walked down the long, dark corridor of Greenwood Heights, the sound of her high heels clicking sharply on the cold stone floor, echoing through the empty space. Each step felt heavy, but in her eyes, the fire of hatred burned brighter than ever. The wooden doors on either side seemed to close in on her, as if the very place was turning its back on the one who once held absolute power. She clutched the stack of files to her chest, her breath coming in sharp gasps. In her mind, the words Marcus had just spoken echoed loudly. The value of Greenwood Heights must be built on intellect and heart, not bloodlines or names. Elizabeth gritted her teeth, muttering like a curse. "You won't take this place from me so easily. Marcus Allen." Meanwhile, inside the auditorium, the atmosphere still lingered with the echoes of victory. Marcus stood amidst the circle of shareholders, teachers, and even a few guests who had once doubted him, now changing their stance. The applause slowly faded, replaced by congratulations and genuine looks of respect. An elderly shareholder stepped forward and shook Marcus's hand. His voice sincere, "Mr. Allen, we are grateful for you giving Greenwood Heights a real chance at revival." Marcus shook his hand, his gaze still fixed on the corridor where Elizabeth had just left. He was neither smug nor arrogant, only the calmness of someone who understood the one who once held absolute power does not easily accept defeat. This is just the beginning. Sarah stood beside her father, her eyes sparkling as she whispered, "Dad, from now on, this place will be better." Right, Marcus bent down and gently stroked his daughter's hair, his voice warm. "Yes, sweetheart, and you'll be a part of making it better." In her private office, Elizabeth threw the stack of files onto the desk and opened her computer. She began searching for confidential documents, the hidden connections she had used over the years to manipulate the board and protect her position. The screen flickered with names, figures, and assets cleverly concealed. She dialed a number on the phone, her voice quiet but as sharp as steel. "Prepare the legal files. I'm suing Marcus Allen and the shareholders who've sold out Greenwood Heights. If I can't hold on by honor, I'll hold on by the law." The voice on the other end hesitated before responding. "But Mrs. Harper, Mr. Allen has enough evidence, and now the shareholders are on his side. A lawsuit will—" Elizabeth cut him off, her tone firm. "I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm giving an order. Do it now." She stood by the window, looking out at the schoolyard, her eyes burning with hatred. "Marcus Allen, I'll drag you down to the mud, even if I have to sink with you." Night fell over Greenwood Heights, the darkness enveloping the ancient stone buildings like a curtain, hiding the dark schemes that were quietly forming inside. In her office, Elizabeth stood motionless by the window, gazing at the dim yellow lights outside, where children still played unaware of the rising storm. The telephone rang, breaking the silence of the space. Elizabeth grabbed it, her voice cold as tempered steel. "Where do we stand?" the lawyer's voice came through, cautious but clear. "We've reviewed the charter. There's still a small loophole in the land ownership that the Allen Foundation doesn't fully control. If you wish, we can file a request to temporarily halt all transactions until the legal issues are resolved." Elizabeth's eyes gleamed with a sharp coldness. She gripped the sleeve of her jacket, her voice low but filled with threat. "Do it immediately. The longer it takes, the better. We need time." The next morning, when Marcus entered the temporary executive office the board had arranged for him, his assistant was already waiting, his face marked with clear tension. "Sir, Mrs. Harper has filed with the court. They're requesting to suspend all transactions, all restructuring decisions until the land ownership dispute is resolved." Marcus took the stack of files from his assistant, scanning the first few lines. His face remained unchanged, but his eyes deepened with resolve. "I guessed she wouldn't accept defeat easily. Prepare the legal team. I will personally meet with the founding board. It's time for everything to be made clear." Meanwhile, in a luxurious room of a 5-star hotel in the city, Elizabeth sat with two powerful figures, former silent allies of hers. They were the founding shareholders with the final say on the foundational matters of the school. She placed a thick file in front of them, her voice urgent yet still sharp. "Greenwood Heights is the lifeblood of this entire community. You cannot let an outsider destroy it for his fame and profit. Help me preserve this legacy, and I promise, Your interest will be greater than ever. An elderly man with silver hair, yet a sly glint in his eyes, tapped his fingers lightly on the table. Elizabeth. Marcus Allen doesn't just have money, he has vision. This community needs people like him. You're not just going up against him, you're going against the tide. Elizabeth gritted her teeth, her voice coming through clenched jaws. So, are you going to betray me? I've helped you keep your seats for years. The other man sighed, his voice cold as ice. We're not betraying anyone. We're just standing with what's right. For us. Elizabeth stared at them, her gaze darkening, her hand clutching the file tightly, crumpling it in her grasp. She left the room, the door slamming shut behind her. In the dense darkness of the hallway, she whispered, as though swearing an oath, if I can't hold it in my hands, I'll burn it to the ground before I let Marcus Allen have it. Elizabeth walked quickly down the silent corridor of the hotel, the sharp click of her high heels echoing like the pounding of a heart filled with anger and desperation. She felt the air thicken around her, each breath growing heavier. Her entire life had been spent building a fortress of power, and now it was crumbling before her eyes, not because the enemy was too strong, but because her allies had turned their backs on her. Meanwhile, in the temporary office of Greenwood Heights, Marcus sat at a desk piled with documents, the restructuring plan, and legal files. His team of lawyers was reporting the situation, but his eyes were distant, pensive. He knew Elizabeth wouldn't stop at the land ownership dispute or the lawsuits. A person like her, when cornered, would be willing to crush everything, even herself. His assistant entered, his face clearly anxious. Sir, there are rumors that Mrs. Harper is reaching out to underground connections. We can't verify it, but it seems she's no longer afraid to cross any line. Marcus nodded, his eyes hardening. I anticipated this. Increase security and call the legal team. I want every move she makes under legal scrutiny. Night fell once again, casting a shadow over Greenwood Heights, as if signaling the storm that was quietly approaching. Elizabeth sat in her private apartment, the dim lights casting shadows on her gaunt face, but her eyes still burned with hatred. On the table lay a draft contract with a dark investment group, people ready to manipulate, destroy, and if necessary, drown an empire. She lowered her pen, signing the draft with a soft hiss like a venomous snake. You've pushed me into a corner. Marcus Allen, don't blame me for what's coming next. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath as she swallowed the rising tide of anger coursing through her veins. She knew that from this moment on, every retaliatory strike had to be calculated, every legal clause, every loophole in the contract, every line in the school's charter that she had once held in her hands like a sacred text. The next morning, in the office of a prestigious law firm in downtown, Elizabeth sat in the middle of a team of lawyers she had urgently called together. The neon lights above cast a cold, sharp glow on her face, her expression resolute but steely. We're no longer talking about emotions, Elizabeth began, her voice steady. I want every share transaction Marcus Allen makes to be scrutinized down to the last comma. I want a court order to temporarily suspend any governance decisions he makes regarding Greenwood Heights, citing the ongoing ownership dispute. I want him buried in bureaucracy. The lead lawyer, a man in his 50s, adjusted his glasses, his eyes gleaming with calculated intent. We can do that, Mrs. Harper, but you understand, this is a long-term battle. Justice on paper often belongs to the one who is the most patient. Elizabeth smirked, her gaze cold as ice. I will be patient. More than that. Let's begin. Meanwhile, at the Allen Future Foundation office, Marcus silently read the copy of the lawsuit sent by Elizabeth's lawyers. Each line was an effort to obstruct him, demanding the court freeze his voting rights, requiring an emergency audit of share transactions, and even accusing him of violating the school's charter by pressuring shareholders to sell their shares through financial coercion. His assistant entered, his voice full of concern. Sir, if the court agrees to their temporary injunction, you'll be suspended from all decisions at Greenwood Heights until the case is resolved. They're playing a waiting game to damage your credibility. Marcus looked up, his gaze as unyielding as steel. We're not playing defense. Prepare a counterclaim. Demand the court investigate her past abuses of veto power to maintain racial discrimination. Request the public disclosure of all financial reports from the school over the last 10 years. If they drag me into court, they'll have to expose themselves. The federal court accepted both the lawsuit and the counterclaim. and an emergency hearing was scheduled. The media began reporting, with headlines lighting up Marcus Allen faces legal battle for control of Greenwood Heights, Elizabeth Harper, fighting for legacy or holding on to privilege. The courtroom was packed that day. Elizabeth and her legal team sat on one side, surrounded by thick stacks of files like a fortress. Marcus, on the other side, had only a thin stack of documents, but the confidence and calm radiating from him and his legal team were unmistakable. The judge entered, banging the gavel, his voice commanding, "The hearing will begin. This is not a place for hollow honor. This is where justice speaks." Elizabeth glanced at Marcus, her gaze sharp as a knife. "Let's see if the law truly stands with a newcomer like you." In the courtroom, the atmosphere was taut like a bowstring ready to snap. The sound of flipping through files and pens marking papers echoed sharply, every small noise making everyone present feel their heartbeat quicken. Elizabeth sat up straight, her hands clasped in front of her on the table, her face meticulously made up, though the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her sleepless nights spent plotting. Her legal team was arranged in a long line, each person with a thick stack of documents in front of them, each page color-coded, categorized by areas of attack contracts, bylaws, debatable clauses, and exploitable loopholes. On the other side, Marcus sat calmly, his gaze focused, his back not leaning against the chair, his hands lightly resting on the table. His legal team consisted of only 4 people, but each one was an expert in corporate law, finance, and nonprofit organizations. In front of them was a neat stack of documents, but inside was the culmination of weeks of meticulous preparation. The judge looked down, his voice calm yet firm. Today's hearing will examine the request of the plaintiff, Mrs. Elizabeth Harper, for a temporary injunction on Mr. Marcus Allen's management of Greenwood Heights, along with related demands. The court will also hear the counterclaim of the defendant and proceed with both matters concurrently. Elizabeth nodded slightly. Signaling her lead attorney, he stood up, adjusting his glasses, and began speaking in a steady tone. "Your Honor, Greenwood Heights is not merely a legal entity. It is the cultural legacy of this community. We will demonstrate that Mr. Marcus Allen, with his superior financial position, has used opaque pressure to acquire shares, violating the spirit of the bylaws and damaging the school's reputation. We request the court to issue an emergency order to block Mr. Allen's management actions until the dispute is resolved." The sound of pens scribbling filled the room from the reporters and spectators. Every word would become tomorrow's headline. Marcus didn't change his expression. He gave a slight nod to his lead attorney, who stood up, his gaze calm but firm. "Your Honor, the plaintiff speaks of legacy, but what legacy depends on privilege and discrimination to survive. We have clear evidence for over a decade. The former administration of Greenwood Heights abused the veto power to block all efforts for reform and maintained hidden barriers based on background and race. We have not bought management control through pressure, but through the trust of shareholders who want change. And because of this transparency, we request the court to dismiss the injunction request and allow us to publicly release all of the school's financial reports." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge's eyes narrowed, and he tapped his gavel order. "This is not a place for public opinion to decide. The law will prevail." Elizabeth clenched her fists, her nails digging into her skin, her gaze sharp as a blade as she looked at Marcus. "Do you think playing the hypocrite will win you this battle?" The judge turned his attention to both sides, his voice heavy with meaning. "The court will carefully review the evidence from both sides, but I remind you anyone who uses the law to conceal personal agendas will be exposed under the light of justice. A temporary ruling will be announced after 72 hours. The hearing is adjourned." 3 days later, the court reconvened. The room was packed, not only with lawyers and shareholders, but also journalists, teachers, and alumni of Greenwood Heights. Those who had once prided themselves on the legacy of the school, now here to witness its fate being decided. The judge entered, his voice firm and commanding. "The court has reviewed all files, evidence, cross-examined testimonies, and financial reports. Today, we will hear the final arguments before rendering the decision." Elizabeth's lawyer stood up first. His voice was still sharp, but now there was a noticeable edge of tension. "Your Honor, Greenwood Heights needs to protect its traditions. It must resist being taken over by raw financial power. What Mr. Allen is doing, though cloaked in the guise of reform, is an assault on the very foundation of this institution." Whispers filled the room. Some of the old shareholders nodded in agreement, but the judge's eyes narrowed in scrutiny. Marcus remained calm. His lawyer stood up next, speaking clearly. Each word deliberate, Your Honor. We would like to submit additional evidence first, an audio recording from an internal meeting, where Mrs. Harper directed the deliberate exclusion of student applications based on their background, documentation of secret funds used to maintain a power network within the school to manipulate shareholder meetings, and finally over 1,000 signatures from the community of teachers, parents, and students demanding reform. The room fell silent. The judge flipped through the documents, his eyes cold with seriousness. Mrs. Harper, do you have any comments regarding these pieces of evidence? Elizabeth shot up from her seat. Her voice choked, but still trying to remain firm. These are fabrications, a smear campaign orchestrated by him. The judge slammed his gavel, his voice booming like thunder. Enough! The court will render its decision. He scanned the room, his tone low but chilling. The request to block Mr. Marcus Allen's management rights. Denied. The request to publicly disclose all financial reports and conduct a special audit for the past 10 years. Approved. The investigation into the abuse of power by Mrs. Elizabeth Harper and related associates. Initiated. Elizabeth staggered, her hand gripping the table, her eyes burning with hatred but tinged with helplessness as she looked at Marcus. She understood the wall of power she had built had crumbled right in the very place she once sat on a throne of authority. Months passed, and Greenwood Heights transformed day by day. The old gray stone walls were repaired, but the new spirit truly seeped into every brick. The curriculum changed. No longer governed by unspoken rules of wealth and race, the school's gates opened wide to all deserving students, no longer needing a prestigious lineage or a bloated bank account behind them. That day, the entire school gathered for the official announcement of the reform program on the school grounds. New flags were raised, a flag symbolizing equal education and progress. Marcus stood at the podium, with Sarah by his side, holding his hand tightly. Their eyes looked out over the sea of people, teachers, parents, students, even alumni who had returned to witness this historic moment. He spoke, his voice echoing, each word resolute today. Greenwood Heights no longer belongs to anyone. It belongs to the values we have built together, a place where origin does not define the future, a place where intellect and humanity determine everything. Applause erupted, reverberating through the walls and windows, but at that very moment, in the final seconds when everyone thought the victory was absolute, a sound broke the air. The main door to the hall swung open. Elizabeth entered, gaunt and more haggard than ever, but her eyes still gleamed with fierce determination. In her hands was an old file. The room fell silent. She walked forward, her voice hoarse but still carrying across the courtyard Marcus Allen. You think you've won this? This is the original land ownership document of Greenwood Heights, from the time it was founded, proof that you never truly held any rights over this land. You are nothing but an invader disguised as a reformer. Everyone was stunned. Eyes turned to Marcus, to Elizabeth, and to the file in her hand. Marcus looked at her, his gaze unwavering, not angry, just deep and firm. He stepped forward, his voice clear, without a microphone but loud enough for everyone to hear. Mrs. Harper, I've been waiting for this blow, and I've prepared my answer. He raised his hand. One of his legal advisors stepped forward, holding a notarized copy from the city's land registry. This is the latest confirmation stating that the land ownership has been legally transferred to the Community Education Fund. The documents you provided were nullified in 1987 when the school changed its operational model. Elizabeth froze. Her hand trembled as the file slipped from her grip. The yellowed pages scattered across the marble floor, like the final dream of power she had crumbled before the wind. Marcus bent down, picking up one page, gently placing it into her hand. His voice was calm but resolute. A dream built on division will ultimately turn to dust. It's time for you to rest, Elizabeth Harper. Greenwood Heights now belongs to the future. Elizabeth took a step back, her eyes lost among the sea of people, and this time, no one looked at her with fear, only pity for someone who once stood at the top. Now reduced to a relic of the past, the school bell rang, decisively marking the beginning of a new era. The green and white flag of Greenwood Heights fluttered in the wind, shining brightly under the last light of the afternoon sun, like a declaration of a school reborn from the ashes. Marcus squeezed Sarah's hand, their eyes both fixed on that flag, where all their hopes and responsibilities awaited them ahead.